Question 1. The review process indicates that the current assessment submission workflow for Victoria's Secret & Co. hiring assessments is experiencing delays. To optimize this process, which of the following approaches best balances efficiency with the integrity of candidate submissions and the overall hiring assessment framework? Option A. Eliminate the candidate review step entirely to expedite the submission process, relying solely on automated scoring. Option B. Introduce a manual review by an internal team to identify and correct any perceived errors in candidate submissions before they are finalized. Option C. Focus solely on reducing the time it takes for candidates to complete the assessment without altering the submission or review stages. Option D. Implement a system where candidates can review and confirm their submissions before finalization with a limited window for minor corrections, followed by a prompt automated review. The correct answer is D. Implement a system where candidates can review and confirm their submissions before finalization, with a limited window for minor corrections, followed by a prompt automated review. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing efficiency with compliance and ethical considerations within the specific regulatory framework governing Victoria's Secret & Co. hiring assessment test. The pressure to streamline processes must not override the fundamental principles of fair assessment and data privacy. Careful judgment is required to identify the most effective and compliant approach. The correct approach involves implementing a phased review system that prioritizes candidate experience and data integrity. This approach is right because it aligns with best practices in talent acquisition and, importantly, with the spirit of any assessment guidelines that emphasize fairness, transparency, and data protection. By allowing candidates to review their own submissions before finalization, it fosters a sense of control and accuracy, reducing potential disputes and ensuring that the data used for assessment is as accurate as possible. This proactive measure minimizes the risk of procedural challenges and upholds the integrity of the hiring process. An incorrect approach that bypasses candidate review entirely would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for candidate autonomy and potentially violates implicit or explicit guidelines about fair assessment processes. It creates an environment where candidates feel their input is not valued or accurately represented, leading to potential grievances and a negative perception of Victoria's Secret & Co. as an employer. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on speed without considering the quality or accuracy of the submitted information, is also professionally flawed. This approach risks accepting incomplete or inaccurate data, which can lead to suboptimal hiring decisions and undermine the purpose of the assessment. It prioritizes a superficial metric, speed, over the substantive goal of identifying the best candidates. Finally, an approach that involves manual manipulation of candidate submissions without clear consent or a defined process is ethically problematic and could violate data privacy regulations. This introduces bias and compromises the integrity of the assessment, making it impossible to objectively compare candidates. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the core objectives of the assessment and the relevant guidelines. They should then evaluate potential process optimizations against these objectives, prioritizing approaches that enhance efficiency without compromising fairness, accuracy, candidate experience, or regulatory compliance. A critical step is to anticipate potential ethical and regulatory pitfalls and proactively design processes to mitigate them. Question 2. What factors determine Victoria's Secret & Co.'s ethical responsibility when considering the monetization of customer data, balancing potential revenue generation with data privacy obligations? Option A. The internal cost savings achieved by reducing investment in data security measures, assuming no immediate data breach occurs. Option B. The potential for immediate profit increase and the perceived competitive advantage gained by utilizing customer data more aggressively than competitors. Option C. The extent to which customer data can be anonymized and aggregated, the clarity and transparency of Victoria's Secret & Co.'s privacy policy regarding data usage, and adherence to applicable data protection laws such as the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, or similar state-level regulations. Option D. The ease with which customer data can be accessed and processed by third-party marketing firms, regardless of explicit customer consent or data security protocols. The correct answer is C. the extent to which customer data can be anonymized and aggregated, the clarity and transparency of Victoria's Secret & Co.'s privacy policy regarding data usage, and adherence to applicable data protection laws such as the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, or similar state-level regulations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a company's immediate financial interests and its ethical obligations to its stakeholders, specifically regarding the responsible handling of sensitive customer data. Victoria's Secret & Co. must navigate this situation with integrity, ensuring compliance with relevant data privacy regulations and upholding customer trust. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical imperatives. The correct approach involves prioritizing data security and customer privacy above short-term revenue gains. This means implementing robust data protection measures, transparently communicating data handling practices to customers, and ensuring that any data monetization strategies strictly adhere to privacy policies and applicable laws. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant, fostering long-term customer loyalty and mitigating the risk of regulatory penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate profit by potentially exploiting customer data without explicit consent or adequate safeguards would be ethically indefensible and likely violate data privacy laws. Such an approach would erode customer trust, leading to significant reputational harm and potential legal repercussions, including fines and lawsuits. Another incorrect approach that involves a superficial or misleading privacy policy designed to appear compliant while masking aggressive data usage is also a serious ethical and legal failure. This deception undermines the principle of informed consent and can lead to severe regulatory scrutiny. A third incorrect approach that neglects to invest in adequate data security infrastructure, leaving customer data vulnerable to breaches, is a direct violation of the duty of care owed to customers and a failure to comply with data protection regulations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. Next, they must thoroughly understand the applicable legal and regulatory landscape, particularly data privacy laws. Ethical principles, such as transparency, fairness, and accountability, should then be applied to evaluate potential courses of action. A risk assessment should be conducted for each option, considering both financial and reputational consequences. Finally, the decision should be made based on the option that best balances legal compliance, ethical considerations, and long-term business sustainability, always erring on the side of protecting customer privacy. Question 3. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some customers of Victoria's Secret & Co. are expressing confusion regarding the company's return policy, specifically concerning items purchased during promotional periods. This feedback has been shared with the marketing and customer service departments. Considering Victoria's Secret & Co.'s operations within Australia, which of the following approaches best addresses this situation in a manner that is compliant with Australian consumer law and upholds ethical business practices? Option A. Publicly post a disclaimer on the Victoria's Secret & Co. website stating that all feedback regarding return policies is noted but will not be acted upon unless legally mandated. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the current return policy documentation and customer service scripts to ensure clarity and compliance with the Australian Consumer Law Act, and then update internal training and customer-facing communications as necessary to address the identified confusion. Option C. Issue a company-wide directive to customer service representatives to verbally inform customers that all sales are final during promotional periods, regardless of the written policy, to avoid further disputes. Option D. Immediately revise the return policy to be more restrictive during promotional periods to prevent future confusion, without consulting legal counsel or assessing the impact on customer satisfaction. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the current return policy documentation and customer service scripts to ensure clarity and compliance with the Australian Consumer Law Act, and then update internal training and customer-facing communications as necessary to address the identified confusion. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Victoria's Secret & Co. is operating within a specific regulatory environment, and any communication or action must strictly adhere to those established laws and guidelines. The core of the challenge lies in balancing stakeholder expectations with legal and ethical obligations, particularly when feedback suggests a potential disconnect or misunderstanding of company policies or regulatory requirements. Careful judgment is required to ensure that responses are not only responsive to feedback, but also compliant and uphold the company's integrity. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Victoria's Secret & Co.'s internal policies and relevant Australian consumer protection laws. This approach is right because it prioritizes compliance and accuracy. By referencing established legal frameworks and internal guidelines, the company can provide a response that is both informed and legally sound, thereby protecting itself from potential regulatory scrutiny and maintaining stakeholder trust. This demonstrates a commitment to operating ethically and within the bounds of the law, which is a fundamental expectation for any publicly traded company. An incorrect approach that involves immediately issuing a public statement without internal verification risks misrepresenting information or making commitments that cannot be legally fulfilled. This could lead to regulatory penalties under Australian consumer law, such as misleading or deceptive conduct provisions. Another incorrect approach, such as dismissing the feedback without investigation, fails to acknowledge potential issues and could be seen as a breach of good corporate governance principles and a disregard for stakeholder concerns, potentially impacting the company's reputation and future regulatory relationships. A third incorrect approach, which is to only address the feedback internally without considering external communication implications, might miss an opportunity to proactively manage public perception and could lead to a reactive, rather than proactive, crisis management situation if the issue escalates. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the nature of the stakeholder feedback and its potential implications. This involves identifying the relevant regulatory jurisdiction, in this case, Australia, and consulting applicable laws and company policies. The next step is to gather all necessary information internally to accurately assess the situation. Based on this assessment, a decision should be made on the most appropriate course of action, which may involve internal adjustments, external communication, or both, always ensuring that all actions are compliant and ethically sound. Question 4. Stakeholder feedback indicates that certain recent Victoria's Secret & Co. marketing campaigns may be perceived as misleading regarding product efficacy and material sourcing. Which of the following represents the most appropriate initial response for Victoria's Secret & Co. to ensure compliance with Australian advertising standards and consumer protection laws? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive internal review of the specific marketing campaigns in question, gathering all relevant data and consulting with legal and compliance teams to assess adherence to Australian advertising codes and consumer protection legislation. Option B. Immediately issue a public statement clarifying the company's commitment to transparency and promising a review of marketing practices. Option C. Publicly acknowledge the feedback and state that the company believes its current advertising is accurate and compliant without further investigation. Option D. Advise the marketing department to cease all current advertising activities until a new, less controversial campaign can be developed. The correct answer is B. Immediately issue a public statement clarifying the company's commitment to transparency and promising a review of marketing practices. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Victoria's Secret & Co. is facing potential reputational damage and regulatory scrutiny due to allegations of misleading advertising. Navigating such situations requires a delicate balance between addressing stakeholder concerns, adhering to advertising standards, and maintaining brand integrity. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that all communications are truthful, not misleading, and comply with relevant consumer protection laws. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation into the stakeholder feedback. This means gathering all relevant information, reviewing the specific advertising campaigns in question against established advertising codes and consumer protection legislation, and consulting with legal and compliance teams. This approach is correct because it prioritizes factual accuracy and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of fair advertising and consumer protection, which are paramount in ensuring that Victoria's Secret & Co. operates ethically and legally. By conducting a comprehensive review, the company can identify any genuine issues and take appropriate corrective actions, thereby mitigating risks and rebuilding trust. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the feedback outright without proper investigation. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it demonstrates a disregard for stakeholder concerns and potentially violates advertising standards that prohibit misleading claims. Such a response could lead to further reputational damage, regulatory penalties, and a loss of consumer confidence. Another incorrect approach would be to issue a public statement without a thorough internal review. This is a failure because it risks making further unsubstantiated claims or misrepresenting the situation, which could exacerbate legal and reputational issues. It bypasses the necessary due diligence required to address advertising compliance effectively. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to focus solely on damage control through public relations without addressing the underlying advertising practices. This is a failure because it fails to rectify the root cause of the problem, which is the potential for misleading advertising. True resolution requires addressing the substance of the allegations, not just the perception. Professionals should approach such situations by first acknowledging the feedback and initiating a structured investigation. This involves a systematic review of the advertising in question, cross-referencing it with applicable regulations and industry codes. Seeking expert advice from legal and compliance departments is crucial. The decision-making process should be guided by principles of transparency, accuracy, and adherence to all relevant consumer protection laws and advertising standards. Question 5. The monitoring system demonstrates that a Victoria's Secret & Co. associate has been accessing non-work-related websites during core business hours for an extended period. The associate's performance metrics have recently shown a slight decline. What is the most appropriate initial course of action? Option A. Immediately issue a formal warning to the associate for policy violation and performance issues. Option B. Report the findings directly to senior management without speaking to the associate or their manager. Option C. Discreetly gather additional context regarding the associate's website activity and recent performance, and consider a private, fact-finding conversation with the associate or their direct manager. Option D. Ignore the monitoring data as it may be inaccurate and focus solely on the recent performance metrics. The correct answer is A. Immediately issue a formal warning to the associate for policy violation and performance issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's legitimate interest in monitoring employee activity with the employee's right to privacy and the ethical implications of potentially misinterpreting data. The monitoring system's output is ambiguous, and acting solely on the raw data without further investigation could lead to unfair accusations or disciplinary actions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any actions taken are based on a thorough understanding of the situation and adhere to ethical principles and relevant company policies. The correct approach involves a nuanced investigation that respects employee rights while addressing potential policy violations. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes gathering all relevant facts before making a judgment. It involves discreetly seeking clarification from the employee or their direct manager and reviewing additional context, such as project timelines or known personal circumstances, before concluding that a policy violation has occurred. This aligns with ethical principles of fairness, due process, and avoiding hasty conclusions. It also implicitly adheres to any company policies regarding employee monitoring and disciplinary procedures, which typically require a thorough investigation and opportunity for the employee to respond. An incorrect approach would be to immediately confront the employee with the raw data and assume a violation has occurred. This is ethically problematic as it presumes guilt without due process and can damage trust and morale. It also fails to consider alternative explanations for the observed behavior, such as legitimate work-related tasks that might appear unusual out of context. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the data entirely, as this could lead to a failure to address genuine policy breaches or performance issues, potentially impacting team productivity or compliance. Finally, immediately escalating the issue to HR without any preliminary fact-finding or seeking clarification from the employee or their manager would be an overreaction, demonstrating a lack of independent judgment and potentially creating unnecessary conflict. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes information gathering, contextual understanding, and adherence to established procedures. This involves 1. Observing the data and identifying potential concerns. 2. Seeking to understand the context and gathering additional information. 3. Considering multiple interpretations of the data. 4. Consulting relevant policies and guidelines. 5. Engaging in discreet and fair communication with the employee or their manager if necessary. 6. Making a reasoned decision based on all available evidence. Question 6. Quality control measures reveal a consistent defect in a popular line of Victoria's Secret & Co. intimate apparel, impacting its durability. What is the most appropriate stakeholder communication strategy for Victoria's Secret & Co. to adopt? Option A. Offer a small discount on future purchases to customers who report experiencing issues with the affected product line. Option B. Immediately issue a public recall and detailed explanation of the defect and corrective actions being taken. Option C. Continue selling the affected product line while internally investigating the defect, with no immediate external communication. Option D. Issue a general statement about ongoing quality improvement initiatives without specifically mentioning the defect. The correct answer is B. Immediately issue a public recall and detailed explanation of the defect and corrective actions being taken. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Victoria's Secret & Co. due to the potential for misrepresenting product quality to consumers, which can erode trust and lead to regulatory scrutiny. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need to address product defects with the obligation to maintain accurate and transparent communication with stakeholders, including customers and regulatory bodies. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any corrective actions are both effective and ethically sound, adhering strictly to consumer protection laws. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent communication strategy. This means acknowledging the identified quality control issues internally, investigating the root cause, and then communicating the findings and corrective actions to relevant stakeholders in a timely and honest manner. This aligns with ethical business practices and regulatory requirements that mandate truthful advertising and product information. Specifically, under consumer protection laws, companies have a duty to avoid deceptive or misleading practices. By openly addressing the quality issues, Victoria's Secret & Co. demonstrates a commitment to product integrity and customer well-being, thereby mitigating potential legal and reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to downplay or conceal the quality control issues. This could manifest as continuing to sell affected products without disclosure or issuing vague statements that do not adequately inform consumers about the nature or extent of the problem. Such actions would likely violate consumer protection regulations that prohibit misleading advertising and require disclosure of material product defects. Ethically, it represents a failure to uphold a duty of care to customers, potentially exposing them to substandard products and undermining the company's credibility. Another incorrect approach might be to implement superficial fixes without addressing the underlying systemic issues that led to the quality control failures. This would be a failure to act with due diligence and could result in recurring problems, further damaging consumer trust and potentially leading to more severe regulatory penalties for repeated noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, integrity, and compliance. This involves first understanding the specific regulatory landscape governing product quality and consumer communication. Then, assessing the severity and scope of the quality issue. Subsequently, developing a communication plan that is truthful, comprehensive, and timely, outlining both the problem and the proposed solutions. Finally, ensuring that internal processes are robust enough to prevent recurrence, demonstrating a commitment to continuous improvement and ethical conduct. Question 7. The evaluation methodology shows that Victoria's Secret & Co. is exploring ways to enhance its customer loyalty program through more personalized marketing. Which of the following approaches best aligns with a responsible and compliant process optimization strategy for handling customer data? Option A. Implementing a new data analytics platform that aggregates all available customer purchase history and browsing behavior to create highly targeted marketing segments, without a specific review of the original consent obtained for each data point. Option B. Expanding the use of third-party data brokers to enrich customer profiles for more personalized offers, assuming that the data obtained is legally acquired. Option C. Automating the process of sending promotional emails to all customers based on broad demographic categories, without actively seeking updated consent for this specific type of communication. Option D, developing a phased approach to process optimization that begins with a comprehensive review of current data collection and usage policies against applicable privacy regulations, followed by the design of new processes that embed privacy controls from the outset. The correct answer is A, implementing a new data analytics platform that aggregates all available customer purchase history and browsing behavior to create highly targeted marketing segments without a specific review of the original consent obtained for each data point. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Victoria's Secret & Co. employees tasked with optimizing processes, particularly when those processes involve customer data and marketing. The core challenge lies in balancing the drive for efficiency and improved customer engagement with the stringent requirements of data privacy regulations. Professionals must exercise careful judgment to ensure that any process optimization does not inadvertently lead to non-compliance, which can result in significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The need to adhere strictly to the specified regulatory framework for this assessment is paramount. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing data handling practices against the relevant privacy laws and guidelines applicable to Victoria's Secret & Co. This includes understanding consent mechanisms, data minimization principles, and the rights of individuals regarding their personal information. By prioritizing a privacy-by-design methodology, Victoria's Secret & Co. can ensure that any new or modified processes are inherently compliant, thereby safeguarding customer data and maintaining regulatory adherence. This proactive stance is ethically sound and legally defensible, aligning with the principles of responsible data stewardship. An approach that focuses solely on increasing marketing campaign reach without a concurrent, rigorous assessment of data privacy implications is ethically and regulatorily flawed. This could lead to the unauthorized use or excessive collection of customer data, violating principles of consent and purpose limitation. Another incorrect approach would be to implement process changes based on assumptions about customer preferences without verifying that the data used for such assumptions was collected and is being processed in a compliant manner. This bypasses essential data protection safeguards. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over a comprehensive review of data security protocols risks exposing sensitive customer information to breaches, which is a direct violation of data protection obligations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates regulatory compliance and ethical considerations into every stage of process optimization. This involves conducting impact assessments, seeking legal counsel when necessary, and ensuring that all team members are trained on relevant data privacy laws. The process should be iterative, with regular checks to ensure ongoing compliance as regulations evolve and business needs change. Question 8. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a significant portion of revenue recognized in the current quarter by Victoria's Secret & Co. may not meet the established criteria for revenue recognition under U.S. GAAP, potentially due to aggressive sales terms offered to a key distributor. The finance team is under pressure to meet projected earnings for the quarter. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation in compliance with U.S. regulatory frameworks and ethical standards? Option A. Proceed with the original revenue recognition as planned, assuming the sales terms were permissible, and address any potential issues in the subsequent quarter's reporting. Option B. Immediately adjust the revenue recognition for the identified transactions to comply with U.S. GAAP. Thoroughly investigate the root cause with internal audit, and consult with external auditors on the appropriate accounting treatment and disclosure. Option C. Defer the recognition of the identified revenue to the next quarter without a formal investigation, citing uncertainty in the sales terms, to avoid impacting the current quarter's earnings. Option D. Adjust the revenue recognition to meet the projected earnings target for the quarter, even if it means slightly bending the interpretation of U.S. GAAP to satisfy investor expectations. The correct answer is B. Immediately adjust the revenue recognition for the identified transactions to comply with U.S. GAAP. Thoroughly investigate the root cause with internal audit, and consult with external auditors on the appropriate accounting treatment and disclosure. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's financial reporting obligations with the ethical imperative to accurately represent its performance to investors and the public. Victoria's Secret & Co. operates within a highly regulated environment, and any misrepresentation of financial data can have severe consequences, including regulatory penalties, loss of investor confidence, and damage to the company's reputation. The pressure to meet market expectations or internal targets can create an environment where shortcuts or misleading presentations might be considered, making robust ethical judgment and adherence to accounting standards paramount. The correct approach involves a thorough and transparent review of the identified discrepancies, involving the internal audit team and potentially external auditors, to determine the root cause and the appropriate accounting treatment. This approach prioritizes accuracy, integrity, and compliance with generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, as mandated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, for publicly traded companies in the U.S. By engaging internal and external audit functions, Victoria's Secret & Co. ensures that any adjustments are made in accordance with established accounting standards and are subject to independent verification, thereby upholding its fiduciary duty to shareholders and maintaining the credibility of its financial statements. This aligns with the SEC's focus on accurate and reliable financial reporting, essential for fair and efficient capital markets. An incorrect approach that involves immediately adjusting the revenue recognition to meet the quarter-end target without a proper investigation fails to adhere to GAAP. Revenue recognition must be based on the substance of the transaction and specific criteria being met, not on arbitrary financial goals. This action would constitute aggressive or potentially fraudulent accounting, violating SEC regulations and ethical standards. Another incorrect approach, which is to defer the revenue recognition to the next quarter without proper justification or documentation, also presents issues. While deferral might be appropriate in some circumstances, doing so solely to manage quarterly performance without a sound accounting basis is misleading. It misrepresents the company's performance in the current period and can still lead to an inaccurate financial picture, potentially violating disclosure requirements and the principle of presenting a true and fair view. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the feedback and proceed with the original reporting, is the most egregious. This demonstrates a disregard for potential financial misstatements and a failure to address stakeholder concerns, directly contravening the company's responsibility for accurate financial reporting and its ethical obligations to investors. This inaction could lead to significant regulatory scrutiny and penalties from the SEC. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Acknowledging and investigating all stakeholder feedback regarding financial reporting. 2. Consulting relevant accounting standards, U.S. GAAP and regulatory guidance, SEC rules. 3. Engaging internal audit and, if necessary, external auditors to assess the situation objectively. 4. Determining the appropriate accounting treatment based on facts, evidence, and accounting principles, not on financial targets. 5. Ensuring transparent disclosure of any material adjustments or accounting policies. 6. Documenting all decisions and justifications thoroughly. Question 9. The efficiency study reveals that Victoria's Secret & Co.'s current hiring process for retail associates is taking longer than industry benchmarks, leading to increased recruitment costs. To streamline this, management is considering implementing a new screening questionnaire that prioritizes candidates who have completed a specific, non-industry-related vocational course, believing this will filter for more motivated individuals. What is the most appropriate regulatory compliance approach for Victoria's Secret & Co. to consider? Option A. Rely on the subjective judgment of hiring managers to assess candidate motivation during interviews, deeming the questionnaire unnecessary if managers feel they can accurately gauge suitability. Option B. Immediately implement the new screening questionnaire as proposed by management, assuming that filtering for candidates with specific vocational training will inherently lead to a more efficient and effective hiring process. Option C. Conduct a thorough legal review of the proposed screening questionnaire and its criteria against Australian anti-discrimination legislation to ensure it does not disproportionately disadvantage any protected group and that the vocational course requirement is a genuine occupational requirement for the role. Option D. Introduce a mandatory skills-based assessment that is not directly linked to the vocational course, but is designed to be challenging and time-consuming to ensure only the most dedicated candidates proceed. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough legal review of the proposed screening questionnaire and its criteria against Australian anti-discrimination legislation to ensure it does not disproportionately disadvantage any protected group, and that the vocational course requirement is a genuine occupational requirement for the role. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Victoria's Secret & Co. must balance the need for operational efficiency and cost reduction with its legal and ethical obligations to its employees and the broader regulatory environment. The company's hiring practices are subject to various employment laws designed to ensure fairness and prevent discrimination. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and a decline in employee morale. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any efficiency measures do not inadvertently create a discriminatory hiring process. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Victoria's Secret & Co.'s existing hiring criteria and processes against the relevant Australian employment law, specifically focusing on the principles of equal opportunity and non-discrimination. This approach ensures that any proposed changes are compliant with legal requirements, such as those outlined in the Fair Work Act 2009, CTH, and any relevant state-based anti-discrimination legislation. By proactively identifying and rectifying potential discriminatory elements, the company upholds its legal obligations and ethical commitment to fair hiring. An incorrect approach would be to implement changes based solely on perceived efficiency without a legal review. This could lead to the adoption of criteria that, while appearing efficient, have a disparate impact on protected groups, thereby violating anti-discrimination laws. For example, setting arbitrary educational requirements that are not essential for the role could disproportionately exclude candidates from certain backgrounds. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on informal or subjective assessments of candidates, as these are prone to unconscious bias and can be difficult to defend legally if challenged. Finally, ignoring feedback from HR or legal counsel regarding potential compliance issues would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure, demonstrating a disregard for established legal frameworks and best practices. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical considerations. This involves 1. Understanding the specific legal obligations applicable to hiring practices in Australia. 2. Conducting a risk assessment of proposed changes, identifying potential legal and ethical pitfalls. 3. Consulting with legal and HR experts to ensure all decisions align with regulatory requirements and company values. 4. Documenting the rationale behind all hiring decisions and process changes to provide a clear audit trail. Question 10. The assessment process reveals that Victoria's Secret & Co. is planning a new loyalty program that will collect detailed purchase history and browsing behavior to personalize offers. Before full implementation, what is the most appropriate risk assessment approach to ensure compliance with privacy regulations and maintain customer trust? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks associated with the data collection and personalization strategy. Option B. Rely on existing general privacy policies and assume they adequately cover the new program's data handling practices. Option C. Implement the program immediately and gather feedback on privacy concerns after launch to make necessary adjustments. Option D. Prioritize the potential for increased sales and customer engagement, addressing any privacy concerns only if they are raised by customers or regulators. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks associated with the data collection and personalization strategy. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where Victoria's Secret & Co. is considering a new marketing campaign that might inadvertently leverage customer data in a way that could be perceived as intrusive or non-compliant with privacy regulations. This is professionally challenging because it requires balancing aggressive business growth strategies with the imperative to protect customer trust and adhere to legal mandates. The potential for reputational damage and regulatory penalties necessitates a rigorous risk assessment. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive privacy impact assessment, PIA, before launching the campaign. This involves systematically identifying potential privacy risks associated with the proposed data processing activities, evaluating the likelihood and impact of these risks, and developing mitigation strategies. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant because it proactively addresses potential privacy violations, aligns with principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, and demonstrates Victoria's Secret & Co.'s commitment to responsible data handling, thereby fostering customer trust and avoiding regulatory scrutiny. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the campaign based on a cursory review of privacy policies, assuming that existing general guidelines are sufficient. This fails to acknowledge the specific risks introduced by the new campaign's data usage and could lead to breaches of privacy laws, such as those requiring specific consent for certain data uses or mandating transparency about data processing. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize the potential revenue gains from the campaign over any identified privacy concerns, opting to address issues only if they arise. This demonstrates a disregard for regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities, potentially exposing Victoria's Secret & Co. to significant fines, legal action, and severe damage to its brand reputation. It also erodes customer confidence, which is a critical asset for any retail business. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to Victoria's Secret & Co.'s operations. This involves identifying all applicable data privacy laws and guidelines. Subsequently, a thorough risk assessment should be performed for any new initiative, focusing on potential impacts on individuals' privacy. Mitigation strategies should be developed and implemented, and ongoing monitoring should be established to ensure continued compliance. The ultimate decision should be guided by a commitment to ethical conduct and legal adherence, even if it means modifying or delaying a revenue-generating initiative. Question 11. Compliance review shows that a candidate for a key management position at Victoria's Secret & Co. has a discrepancy in their background check report regarding a previous employment period. The hiring manager is eager to extend an offer immediately due to urgent business needs. What is the most appropriate course of action for the HR department? Option A. Extend the offer to the candidate immediately, assuming the discrepancy is minor and will not impact their performance. Option B. Expedite the background check review process to address the discrepancy and consult with the hiring manager regarding the findings before making a final decision. Option C. Proceed with the hire without further investigation into the discrepancy, focusing solely on the candidate's interview performance. Option D. Inform the hiring manager that the offer cannot be extended until the background check is fully resolved, regardless of the urgency. The correct answer is B. Expedite the background check review process to address the discrepancy and consult with the hiring manager regarding the findings before making a final decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate operational needs with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Victoria's Secret & Co. must ensure that its hiring practices are not only efficient, but also fair and compliant with all applicable employment laws and ethical standards. The pressure to fill a critical role quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise these principles. Careful judgment is required to navigate this tension. The correct approach involves a thorough, albeit expedited, review of the candidate's qualifications against the established criteria, and a transparent communication of any potential concerns to the hiring manager. This aligns with the ethical principle of fairness in hiring and the regulatory requirement to make employment decisions based on objective criteria, free from bias. It also upholds the company's commitment to a robust and compliant hiring process, even under time constraints. An incorrect approach would be to bypass the standard background check due to time pressure. This failure exposes Victoria's Secret & Co. to significant regulatory risk, as many jurisdictions have laws requiring due diligence in hiring, especially for roles involving sensitive information or financial responsibilities. Ethically, it breaches the principle of due care and could lead to the hiring of an unsuitable candidate, potentially causing harm to the company or its stakeholders. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the hire without addressing the flagged discrepancy in the background check. This demonstrates a disregard for established internal policies and potentially external regulations designed to ensure candidate suitability. It creates a precedent for overlooking critical vetting steps, undermining the integrity of the hiring process and increasing the risk of future compliance issues. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly identify the core issue and the competing priorities. G. Speed vs. thoroughness. Second, consult relevant internal policies and any applicable regulatory guidelines to understand the mandatory requirements. Third, assess the potential risks associated with each possible course of action. Fourth, seek guidance from HR or legal counsel if the situation is complex or involves significant uncertainty. Finally, make a decision that prioritizes compliance and ethical conduct while seeking to mitigate operational impact as much as possible. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood and high potential impact for discrepancies in inventory valuation at Victoria's Secret & Co.'s distribution centers. Which of the following represents the most appropriate immediate response to this finding? Option A. Immediately adjust the reported inventory values based on the risk matrix assessment without further verification. Option B. Acknowledge the finding but defer further investigation until the next scheduled internal audit cycle to conserve resources. Option C. Assign a junior analyst to conduct a brief review of the most recent inventory reports to confirm the existence of the problem. Option D. Initiate a detailed review of inventory valuation procedures, including a sample testing of recent transactions and physical counts, to identify the root cause of potential discrepancies and implement corrective actions. The correct answer is D. Initiate a detailed review of inventory valuation procedures, including a sample testing of recent transactions and physical counts, to identify the root cause of potential discrepancies and implement corrective actions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Victoria's Secret & Co., like any publicly traded company, operates under a strict regulatory environment designed to ensure fair and transparent financial reporting. The risk matrix, a common tool in internal control and audit, highlights potential areas of concern. The challenge lies in interpreting these risks and determining the appropriate response, balancing the need for thorough investigation with the operational realities of a large organization. Misinterpreting or mishandling these identified risks can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of investor confidence. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of risk assessment and mitigation, directly aligned with the principles of internal control frameworks such as those promoted by the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, SOX, in the United States, which is the relevant regulatory framework for Victoria's Secret & Co. This approach prioritizes understanding the root cause of the identified risks, assessing their potential impact and likelihood, and then developing and implementing specific control activities to address them. This ensures that financial reporting is reliable and that the company complies with its legal and ethical obligations. The process should involve collaboration between relevant departments, clear communication, and a focus on remediation. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss or downplay the risks identified in the matrix without proper investigation. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to the principles of internal control and a disregard for regulatory requirements. Specifically, ignoring potential control deficiencies or misstatements in financial reporting violates the spirit and letter of SOX, which mandates that management establish and maintain adequate internal control over financial reporting. Another incorrect approach would be to implement superficial or ad hoc solutions that do not address the underlying issues. This shows a lack of due diligence and a failure to establish effective controls, potentially leading to recurring problems and continued noncompliance. A third incorrect approach might involve a lack of documentation or communication regarding the identified risks and the actions taken. This hinders accountability and makes it difficult to demonstrate compliance to auditors or regulators. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the context of the risk matrix within Victoria's Secret & Co.'s internal control system. They should then follow a structured process, identify the specific risks, assess their materiality and likelihood, determine the root causes, design and implement appropriate controls, and continuously monitor their effectiveness. This process should be well documented and communicated to relevant stakeholders. Question 13. System analysis indicates that a key supplier for Victoria's Secret & Co. in its Australian market has been flagged for potential breaches of environmental regulations related to waste disposal. This could impact the ethical sourcing claims made by Victoria's Secret & Co. to Australian consumers. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation in compliance with Australian consumer law and ethical business practices? Option A. Prioritize finding a financially viable alternative supplier without a detailed review of the current supplier's environmental practices, focusing on minimizing immediate cost increases. Option B. Investigate the allegations discreetly, and if confirmed, instruct the supplier to rectify the issue without public disclosure or formal impact assessment to maintain operational continuity. Option C. Conduct a thorough impact assessment to understand the scope and severity of the environmental breaches, their potential consequences for Victoria's Secret & Co.'s brand and operations, and to determine the most appropriate remediation or corrective action in line with Australian consumer law. Option D. Immediately cease all business with the supplier and initiate a search for a new one to avoid any association with non-compliance. The correct answer is D. Immediately cease all business with the supplier and initiate a search for a new one to avoid any association with non-compliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Victoria's Secret & Co. employees due to the inherent conflict between maintaining brand image and adhering to ethical sourcing practices. The company's commitment to ethical labor and environmental standards, as often communicated to consumers, creates an expectation that their supply chain operations will reflect these values. When a potential issue arises, such as a supplier's non-compliance, employees must navigate the pressure to quickly resolve the problem to avoid disruption to production and potential negative publicity, while simultaneously ensuring that any resolution is compliant with Victoria's Secret & Co.'s internal policies and relevant Australian consumer protection laws. The need for a thorough impact assessment stems from the potential for significant reputational damage, financial penalties, and erosion of consumer trust if ethical breaches are not addressed appropriately. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive impact assessment. This entails systematically evaluating the potential consequences of the supplier's non-compliance across various dimensions: ethical labor practices, environmental impact, operational supply chain disruption, production delays, financial potential fines, increased costs, and reputational brand image, consumer perception. By understanding the full scope of the issue, Victoria's Secret & Co. can make informed decisions about the appropriate course of action, which might include working with the supplier to rectify the issues, seeking alternative suppliers, or terminating the relationship. This approach aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct and the Australian Consumer Law Act, which prohibits misleading or deceptive conduct and requires businesses to ensure their products and services meet certain standards. A proactive and thorough assessment demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to upholding ethical standards, thereby protecting the company's brand and its stakeholders. An incorrect approach would be to immediately terminate the supplier relationship without investigation. This fails to acknowledge the potential for remediation and could lead to unnecessary disruption and cost. Ethically, it might also be unfair to the supplier if the issue is minor or can be easily corrected. From a regulatory standpoint, a hasty termination without due diligence might not be justifiable under contract law and could expose Victoria's Secret & Co. to legal challenges. Another incorrect approach is to downplay the severity of the noncompliance to avoid immediate action. This is ethically unsound as it ignores potential harm to workers or the environment and violates the company's stated values. It also creates a significant regulatory risk under the ACL, as knowingly continuing to source from a non-compliant supplier could be construed as misleading consumers about the ethical credentials of Victoria's Secret & Co. products. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the financial implications of the non-compliance, such as the cost of finding a new supplier, without considering the ethical and reputational impacts. This narrow focus neglects the broader responsibilities of Victoria's Secret & Co. as a corporate citizen and could lead to decisions that, while financially expedient in the short term, cause long-term damage to the brand and its relationship with consumers. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This begins with identifying potential issues, followed by evaluating their likelihood and impact. For Victoria's Secret & Co., this means considering ethical, operational, financial, and reputational factors. Once the impact is understood, various response options should be generated and evaluated against the company's values, ethical guidelines, and legal obligations, particularly those under Australian consumer law. The chosen course of action should be documented, and its effectiveness should be monitored. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are well-reasoned, compliant, and aligned with the company's long-term strategic objectives and ethical commitments. Question 14. Governance review demonstrates that Victoria's Secret & Co. is planning a new global marketing campaign that will involve collecting and processing customer data across multiple international markets. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with diverse data privacy regulations while achieving campaign objectives? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive data privacy impact assessment (DPIA) for each relevant jurisdiction, identifying lawful bases for data processing and ensuring alignment with local regulations and customer consent requirements. Option B. Proceed with the campaign using existing data collection methods, relying on general data protection principles without specific jurisdictional analysis. Option C. Prioritize campaign reach and personalization by collecting all available customer data, regardless of specific jurisdictional consent requirements. Option D. Assume that consent obtained for marketing purposes in the company's primary operating region is sufficient for all international markets. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive data privacy impact assessment (DPIA) for each relevant jurisdiction, identifying lawful bases for data processing and ensuring alignment with local regulations and customer consent requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Victoria's Secret & Co. must navigate the complex landscape of data privacy regulations while conducting a global marketing campaign. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for personalized customer engagement with the imperative to comply with diverse and evolving data protection laws across different jurisdictions. This requires a nuanced understanding of what constitutes personal data and the lawful basis for its processing in each relevant region. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive data privacy impact assessment (DPIA) conducted by Victoria's Secret & Co.'s legal and compliance teams in consultation with regional data protection officers. This assessment would meticulously map the data flows, identify all personal data being collected, processed, and shared, and evaluate the necessity and proportionality of such processing for the marketing campaign's objectives. Crucially, it would determine the appropriate lawful basis for processing in each jurisdiction, such as consent, legitimate interests, or contractual necessity, ensuring that all data collection and usage practices align with the specific requirements of applicable laws like the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, if operating in California, or similar regulations in other operating regions. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant, demonstrating a commitment to customer privacy and avoiding potential penalties. An incorrect approach would be to assume that consent obtained in one jurisdiction is automatically valid in another. This fails to recognize that data privacy laws are territorial and have distinct requirements for consent, notice, and data subject rights. Such an assumption could lead to violations of regulations in jurisdictions where consent was not properly obtained or where the scope of consent is narrower. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the campaign without conducting a thorough DPIA, relying solely on general data protection principles without specific jurisdictional analysis. This oversight risks overlooking critical compliance gaps, such as inadequate data minimization, insufficient security measures, or a failure to honor data subject access requests as mandated by specific laws. This reactive stance can lead to significant legal repercussions and reputational damage. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to prioritize marketing objectives over data privacy obligations by implementing data collection practices that are overly broad or intrusive, without a clear and demonstrable lawful basis. This demonstrates a disregard for individual privacy rights and can result in severe penalties under various data protection frameworks. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This begins with identifying all relevant legal and regulatory obligations in each operating jurisdiction. Next, a comprehensive data inventory and mapping exercise should be undertaken to understand what personal data is being collected, how it is processed, and with whom it is shared. This should be followed by a DPIA to assess the risks to individuals' privacy and the compliance of proposed processing activities. Based on the DPIA findings, appropriate mitigation strategies, including obtaining valid consent, implementing robust security measures, and establishing clear data retention policies, must be developed and implemented. Continuous monitoring and regular reviews are essential to adapt to evolving regulations and business practices. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that a Victoria's Secret & Co. associate is assisting a customer who is looking for a comfortable, everyday bra. The customer has expressed a preference for soft fabrics and minimal underwire. The associate is aware that a new, higher commission bra style is available that offers more support but is made of a firmer material and has a more structured underwire. How should the associate proceed to ethically and effectively assist the customer? Option A. Focus on upselling the customer to a matching lingerie set, emphasizing the value of a coordinated look without directly addressing the customer's initial request for a specific type of bra. Option B. Recommend the new, higher commission bra style, highlighting its superior support and modern design, and downplaying the firmer material and structured underwire. Option C. Actively listen to the customer's stated preferences for soft fabrics and minimal underwire, and then recommend bra styles from Victoria's Secret & Co.'s existing range that best match these criteria, even if they offer lower commission. Option D. Suggest a push-up bra, explaining that it can create a more flattering silhouette, regardless of the customer's stated preference for comfort and minimal underwire. The correct answer is B. Recommend the new, higher commission bra style, highlighting its superior support and modern design, and downplaying the firmer material and structured underwire. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Victoria's Secret & Co. employees due to the potential conflict between achieving sales targets and adhering to ethical sales practices. The pressure to meet quotas can lead to overlooking customer needs or pushing products inappropriately, which can damage customer trust and the company's reputation. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves actively listening to the customer's stated needs and preferences, and then recommending products that genuinely align with those requirements. This demonstrates a commitment to customer satisfaction and ethical salesmanship. In the context of Victoria's Secret & Co., this aligns with general principles of fair trading and consumer protection, ensuring that sales are not achieved through misrepresentation or undue pressure. It fosters long-term customer loyalty and upholds the company's brand integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending a higher-priced item solely because it has a higher commission rate, without considering if it truly meets the customer's stated needs, is an ethical failure. This practice can be seen as deceptive and exploitative, potentially violating consumer protection principles that prohibit misleading sales tactics. It prioritizes personal gain over customer welfare and company reputation. Suggesting a product that the customer explicitly stated they are not interested in, based on the salesperson's personal preference or a perceived trend, is also professionally unacceptable. It disregards the customer's autonomy and preferences, leading to dissatisfaction and a negative shopping experience. It fails to respect the customer's right to make informed purchasing decisions. Focusing exclusively on upselling without acknowledging or addressing the customer's initial request demonstrates a lack of attentiveness and respect for the customer's stated needs. This can create frustration and a feeling of being unheard, undermining the customer relationship and potentially leading to a lost sale or a negative review. Professional reasoning. Professionals in retail environments like Victoria's Secret & Co. should employ a customer-centric approach. This involves active listening to understand the customer's needs, providing honest and relevant recommendations, and prioritizing customer satisfaction over immediate sales targets. When faced with pressure to meet quotas, professionals should remember that ethical conduct and customer trust are foundational to sustainable business success. They should seek guidance from management if they feel pressured to engage in unethical practices, and always act in accordance with company policies and consumer protection principles. Question 16. System analysis indicates that an employee at Victoria's Secret & Co. has inadvertently overheard a confidential conversation detailing an upcoming, significant product recall that has not yet been publicly announced. This information is material and could substantially impact the company's stock price once disclosed. The employee, who has a personal investment account, recognizes this as an opportunity to sell their existing Victoria's Secret & Co. shares before the news breaks, thereby avoiding potential losses. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for this employee? Option A. Immediately sell all personal holdings of Victoria's Secret & Co. stock to mitigate potential financial losses before the recall is announced. Option B. Refrain from trading Victoria's Secret & Co. stock and report the overheard information through the company's designated ethics or compliance channels. Option C. Do nothing, as the information was overheard and not directly disclosed, and the employee has no obligation to act. Option D. Share the information with a close friend who is also an investor, advising them to sell their Victoria's Secret & Co. stock. The correct answer is A. Immediately sell all personal holdings of Victoria's Secret & Co. stock to mitigate potential financial losses before the recall is announced. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Victoria's Secret & Co. due to the potential conflict between personal gain and the company's ethical standards and regulatory compliance. The core of the dilemma lies in leveraging insider information for personal benefit, which can have serious legal and ethical repercussions. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation without compromising professional integrity or violating applicable laws and company policies. The correct approach involves prioritizing ethical conduct and adherence to company policy over personal financial advantage. This means refraining from acting on the non-public information and instead reporting it through appropriate channels. This approach aligns with general principles of corporate governance and insider trading regulations, which prohibit the use of material non-public information for trading purposes. Victoria's Secret & Co., as a publicly traded company, is subject to these regulations, and employees are expected to uphold these standards. By reporting the information, the employee demonstrates a commitment to transparency and ethical business practices, protecting both themselves and the company from potential legal scrutiny and reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to use the information to purchase Victoria's Secret & Co. stock. This action directly violates insider trading laws and ethical codes of conduct. Such behavior constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and can lead to severe penalties, including fines, disgorgement of profits, and potential criminal charges. It undermines the fairness of the market and erodes trust in the company. Another incorrect approach would be to share the information with a friend or family member who then trades on it. This is also a form of insider trading, as the employee is facilitating the illegal use of material non-public information. This action not only exposes the employee to legal liability, but also damages their professional relationships and the company's reputation. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the information and take no action. While seemingly passive, this can still be problematic. If the information pertains to a significant issue that could impact the company's financial health or regulatory standing, failing to report it could be seen as a dereliction of duty, especially if the employee has a role that implies a responsibility to identify and report such matters. It also misses an opportunity to uphold ethical standards and potentially prevent future harm. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of company policies, ethical guidelines, and relevant regulations. When faced with information that appears to be material and non-public, an employee should pause and consider the potential implications. The first step is to assess the nature of the information and its potential impact. If it seems to be sensitive or could provide an unfair advantage, the employee should err on the side of caution. The next step is to consult company policies regarding the handling of confidential information and potential conflicts of interest. If uncertainty remains, seeking guidance from a supervisor, the legal department, or the compliance officer is crucial. The overarching principle should always be to act with integrity and in a manner that protects the company and upholds legal and ethical standards. Question 17. Upon reviewing the latest internal report on Victoria's Secret & Co.'s progress towards its stated 2025 sustainability targets, the leadership team discovers that several key initiatives are significantly behind schedule due to supply chain disruptions and unexpected material sourcing challenges. The report indicates that achieving the original targets by the deadline is now highly improbable. Considering the company's public commitments and the increasing stakeholder focus on ESG performance, what is the most responsible and ethically sound approach for Victoria's Secret & Co. to take regarding its sustainability reporting and communication? Option A. Immediately cease all public reporting on the 2025 sustainability targets, citing unforeseen circumstances, and focus solely on operational and financial performance until a new, undefined timeline can be established. Option B. Publicly acknowledge the challenges, provide a revised and realistic timeline for achieving the sustainability goals, and detail the steps being taken to address the setbacks while continuing to invest in ongoing sustainability efforts. Option C. Issue a statement highlighting the company's overall commitment to sustainability without specifically mentioning the 2025 targets or the current challenges, focusing instead on broader, less time-bound environmental initiatives. Option D. Continue to report progress based on the original targets, emphasizing the areas where some progress has been made, and defer detailed discussion of the delays to future, less public internal reviews. The correct answer is B. Publicly acknowledge the challenges, provide a revised and realistic timeline for achieving the sustainability goals, and detail the steps being taken to address the setbacks while continuing to invest in ongoing sustainability efforts. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial interests of Victoria's Secret & Co. with the long-term reputational and ethical obligations to its stakeholders, particularly in the context of evolving consumer expectations and regulatory scrutiny around sustainability. The pressure to demonstrate progress on ESG initiatives, while also managing operational costs and shareholder returns, creates a complex decision-making environment. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any communication or action taken is both truthful and aligned with the company's stated values and commitments. The correct approach involves transparently communicating the challenges and revised timelines for achieving sustainability goals, while also highlighting ongoing efforts and future plans. This demonstrates accountability and a commitment to genuine progress, even when faced with unforeseen obstacles. This aligns with ethical principles of honesty and integrity, and regulatory expectations for accurate and non-misleading corporate disclosures. By acknowledging setbacks and outlining a revised, realistic path forward, Victoria's Secret & Co. can maintain stakeholder trust and avoid potential accusations of greenwashing, which could lead to regulatory penalties and significant reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to downplay or omit the challenges, presenting an overly optimistic or misleading picture of progress. This would violate ethical principles of truthfulness and could be considered a misrepresentation of material facts, potentially attracting regulatory attention for misleading advertising or disclosure. Another incorrect approach would be to abandon the sustainability goals entirely without adequate explanation or stakeholder consultation. This would signal a lack of commitment and could erode trust among environmentally conscious consumers, investors, and employees, leading to negative publicity and potential loss of market share. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on short-term cost savings without considering the long-term implications for sustainability and stakeholder relations would be professionally unsound, as it prioritizes immediate financial gains over broader corporate responsibility. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes stakeholder engagement, ethical considerations, and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. 2. Assessing the potential impact of different decisions on each stakeholder group. 3. Evaluating decisions against ethical principles and relevant regulations. 4. Seeking diverse perspectives and expert advice. 5. Communicating decisions and their rationale transparently and honestly. Question 18. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a new, highly visual social media campaign for Victoria's Secret & Co. could significantly boost engagement and sales, but it relies on aspirational imagery that may not be universally attainable for all body types. Which approach best balances potential commercial gains with regulatory and ethical obligations? Option A. Proceed with the campaign but remove all disclaimers to avoid diluting the aspirational message and potentially confusing consumers about the brand's core identity. Option B. Modify the campaign to include a wider range of body types and realistic portrayals alongside aspirational imagery, ensuring all claims are substantiated and disclosures are clear. Option C. Implement the campaign as planned, focusing on the aspirational nature of the imagery to drive desire and sales, with a disclaimer about individual results varying. Option D. Focus the campaign exclusively on product features and benefits, avoiding any imagery that could be perceived as aspirational or body-related to minimize potential controversy. The correct answer is C. Implement the campaign as planned, focusing on the aspirational nature of the imagery to drive desire and sales, with a disclaimer about individual results varying. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Victoria's Secret & Co. to balance the potential financial benefits of a new marketing strategy against its ethical and regulatory obligations. The company must ensure that any promotional activities are not misleading or deceptive, particularly when targeting a broad consumer base. Careful judgment is required to avoid practices that could lead to consumer harm or regulatory scrutiny. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and consumer protection in all marketing communications. This aligns with the principles of fair advertising and consumer rights, which are fundamental to maintaining consumer trust and adhering to regulatory frameworks designed to prevent deceptive practices. By focusing on clear, accurate, and substantiated claims, Victoria's Secret & Co. upholds its ethical responsibilities and minimizes legal risks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing short-term sales through aggressive or ambiguous messaging would fail to meet regulatory standards. Such an approach could be deemed deceptive if it creates unrealistic expectations or omits crucial information, potentially leading to consumer complaints and investigations by regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach that relies on unsubstantiated claims or endorsements without proper disclosure would also violate advertising ethics and regulations, as it misleads consumers about the product's benefits or the nature of the endorsement. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant regulatory requirements and ethical considerations. This involves a thorough review of advertising standards, consumer protection laws, and internal company policies. Next, potential marketing strategies should be evaluated against these criteria, assessing the risk of misrepresentation or deception. The chosen strategy must then be reviewed by legal and compliance teams to ensure full adherence before implementation. Continuous monitoring of campaign performance and consumer feedback is also crucial for identifying and rectifying any unintended negative consequences. Question 19. The efficiency study reveals that certain administrative tasks within Victoria's Secret & Co.'s retail operations could be streamlined through the adoption of new digital tools. However, the proposed tools require employees to log their break times and task completion through a new system that collects more granular data than currently tracked. What is the most appropriate next step for the project team to consider? Option A. Proceed with a pilot program of the new tools in a single store to gauge employee reaction and operational impact without prior policy review. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of Victoria's Secret & Co.'s existing employee data privacy policies and internal guidelines regarding workplace monitoring and data collection before proceeding with implementation. Option C. Inform employees about the new system and its benefits, and then proceed with implementation, assuming their cooperation. Option D. Immediately implement the new digital tools to realize the projected efficiency gains and cost savings. Correct answer is D. Immediately implement the new digital tools to realize the projected efficiency gains and cost savings. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with adherence to Victoria's Secret & Co.'s internal policies and potentially broader ethical considerations regarding employee well-being and data privacy, even if not explicitly codified in a specific, publicly accessible regulatory framework for this hiring assessment. The core tension lies between achieving cost savings and maintaining a positive and compliant work environment. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed changes do not inadvertently create a hostile work environment, violate privacy expectations, or lead to unintended negative consequences for employee morale and productivity. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing Victoria's Secret & Co. policies and, if applicable, relevant general employment law principles that govern workplace practices and data handling. This approach prioritizes understanding the company's established guidelines and legal obligations before proposing changes. It ensures that any recommendations are not only efficient, but also compliant and ethically sound, safeguarding the company from potential legal repercussions and reputational damage. This aligns with the professional responsibility to act with integrity and due diligence in all business decisions. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without considering policy implications risks violating internal company directives. This could lead to disciplinary action, employee grievances, and a breakdown of trust. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing changes without consulting relevant stakeholders or seeking necessary approvals bypasses established governance structures. This can result in poorly implemented solutions, resistance from employees, and a failure to achieve the intended efficiency gains. Furthermore, any approach that disregards potential employee privacy concerns, even if not explicitly prohibited by a specific regulation in this context, is ethically unsound and could lead to significant backlash and legal challenges under broader privacy principles. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the problem and its context, followed by identifying all relevant constraints, internal policies, ethical considerations, potential legal implications. They should then explore multiple solutions, evaluating each against these constraints. The preferred solution is the one that best balances efficiency with compliance, ethics, and stakeholder impact. This iterative process of analysis, evaluation, and refinement ensures that decisions are well-reasoned and defensible. Question 20. Examination of the data shows that a Victoria's Secret & Co. employee who has access to sensitive financial planning information for the company is considering investing in a publicly traded competitor. The employee believes this investment is permissible because the competitor is a separate entity, and their investment is not based on any specific non-public information about the competitor itself. Which of the following approaches best aligns with ethical conduct and regulatory compliance for Victoria's Secret & Co. employees? Option A. Invest in the competitor, but avoid discussing any aspect of the investment or the competitor with colleagues at Victoria's Secret & Co. Option B. Proactively disclose the potential investment to Victoria's Secret & Co.'s compliance department and seek guidance on whether it constitutes a conflict of interest, adhering to any internal policies and U.S. securities regulations regarding disclosure and conflicts. Option C. Proceed with the investment without disclosure, as the investment is in a separate publicly traded company and not based on insider information about the competitor. Option D. Disclose the investment to the compliance department only after the transaction has been completed. The correct answer is B. Proactively disclose the potential investment to Victoria's Secret & Co.'s compliance department and seek guidance on whether it constitutes a conflict of interest, adhering to any internal policies and U.S. securities regulations regarding disclosure and conflicts. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Victoria's Secret & Co. employee due to the potential for conflicts of interest and the need to uphold ethical standards in financial dealings. The core difficulty lies in balancing personal relationships with professional responsibilities and ensuring that all transactions are conducted with transparency and in accordance with company policy and relevant financial regulations. Careful judgment is required to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to Victoria's Secret & Co.'s established policies regarding personal financial transactions and disclosures, as well as any applicable U.S. securities regulations. This means proactively disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate internal channels and seeking explicit approval before proceeding with any investment that could be perceived as influencing or being influenced by their role at Victoria's Secret & Co. This aligns with ethical principles of transparency, integrity, and avoiding conflicts of interest, which are fundamental to maintaining trust and compliance within the financial industry and corporate environments. U.S. regulations, such as those enforced by the SEC, emphasize disclosure and the prevention of insider trading and market manipulation, which this approach directly supports. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without any disclosure. This failure stems from a disregard for internal company policies designed to prevent conflicts of interest and maintain ethical conduct. It also violates the spirit, if not the letter, of U.S. securities laws that require disclosure of potential conflicts that could affect investment decisions or market integrity. Another incorrect approach would be to disclose the investment only after it has been made. This is a failure of proactive ethical behavior and compliance. Regulations and ethical guidelines typically require disclosure asterisk before asterisk engaging in potentially conflicting activities, not as an afterthought. This post hoc disclosure does not mitigate the initial breach of trust or the potential for perceived impropriety. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the fact that the investment is in a publicly traded company, and therefore not insider information. While true that public companies are subject to different rules than private ones, The conflict of interest arises from the employee's position within Victoria's Secret & Co., and their potential access to material non-public information, or the perception that their investment decisions could be influenced by their role. This approach ignores the broader ethical and policy considerations beyond just insider trading. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of company policies on conflicts of interest and financial conduct, as well as relevant regulatory frameworks. When faced with a potential conflict, the professional should always err on the side of caution by seeking guidance and making full disclosure to the appropriate internal authorities before taking any action. This proactive and transparent approach is crucial for maintaining professional integrity and ensuring compliance.